Have you ever wondered if the most powerful knowledge in history wasn't supernatural at all? Every system that has ever given humans real power over their lives shares one thing in common, and almost no one today is using it on purpose. There's a pattern, a blueprint so consistent across ancient records that it stopped being a coincidence a long time ago. Researchers studying the most successful societies, from Mesopotamian merchants to Florentine banking families, even the inner circles of Hermetic orders in Renaissance Europe, kept finding the same structure. The rituals were different, the language was different, the gods they prayed to were different, but the cognitive architecture underneath it all, it was identical, and that's where our investigation begins. The prosperity rituals you read about in old grimoires or see on temple walls weren't just primitive superstition. They were functional protocols. They were engineered to do something very specific to the human mind, to our attention, to the quality of our decisions, and to our consistency over time. The civilizations that created them understood exactly how they worked, even if they described it in symbolic language instead of clinical terms. But here's the part almost everyone misses. The most important feature wasn't the ceremony itself. It was the four-part structure hidden inside every single one. First, a clearly defined objective. Second, a personal symbol charged with intense emotional meaning. Third, a daily practice of repetition with focused intention. And fourth, taking concrete action aligned with that goal. 4 elements. Showing up with stunning consistency across cultures separated by oceans and thousands of years. This kind of structural pattern doesn't happen by accident. It happens when different groups of people independently discover something real about how the human mind creates results. The fact that this discovery was always encoded in secret traditions, hidden behind ceremonial language, and kept for initiates only, tells you something important about who benefits when this knowledge is kept from the masses. And this is where it gets a little unsettling, because that same 4-part architecture from ancient prosperity rituals is now showing up in the documented protocols of elite performance psychology, in the decision-making frameworks of top executives, and most surprisingly, in the operating logic of artificial intelligence. The pattern didn't vanish when the age of ritual ended. It just migrated. If this kind of investigation speaks to you, subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Before we had brain scans and cognitive behavioral therapy, we had sigils. Before there were executive coaches and performance psychologists, there were masters of initiation who understood something about human attention that the modern world is only now starting to quantify. The use of personal symbols in these rituals wasn't just for decoration. It wasn't superstition. It was a precise application of what we now call associative memory and attentional priming. Here's what the historical record actually shows. Across traditions as different as Kabbalistic mysticism, West African sacred geometry, and Norse runes, the same mechanism appears. A person would create or choose a symbol that represented their desired reality. That symbol was then charged through ritual, which means it was linked to an intense emotional state during a focused, repeated practice. Over time, just seeing that symbol would start to activate the same neural pathways as the emotional state itself. The symbol became a cognitive key. But again, here's what almost no one notices. This isn't metaphysics. This is just how our memory works. The brain builds predictive models based on things that happen together. When you consistently pair a symbol with a state of focused clarity, deep conviction, and directed intention, the brain starts to treat that symbol as a trigger. It becomes a signal that activates those states, even when you're not in the middle of a ceremony. The ritual was the training protocol. The symbol was the installation. And this opens a door that few people dare to walk through. Because once you understand that the mechanism is neurological and supernatural, the question changes completely. It's no longer about if these rituals worked. The documented results across centuries make that question almost irrelevant. The real question becomes why this knowledge was kept inside closed traditions, locked away in languages that only initiates could read, and systematically hidden from the public. Drop a comment if this resonates with an experience you've had. What comes next changes everything, because the answer leads directly to the structure of power itself, and the way invisible systems of symbolic control have always shaped what ordinary people believe is possible for them. Power has never really been about physical force. The most lasting forms of power have always operated through something much more subtle: control over what people believe is possible. And the best tool for that has always been managing symbolic knowledge, deciding who gets to understand how reality is shaped, who gets to access the frameworks that produce results, and who is just handed belief systems that keep them waiting for outside conditions to change. The secret traditions that preserved these prosperity rituals weren't just being protective for spiritual reasons. Restricting access served a clear, structural function. When a small group of people understands how focused intention, symbolic anchoring, and aligned behavior create outcomes, while the rest of the population believes prosperity is granted by fate or luck, the power difference is massive, and it perpetuates itself. But here's a detail most people miss. This isn't just ancient history. The exact same dynamic is happening right now, just with updated language. The behavioral frameworks used by elite athletes, which you can read about in sports psychology journals, are functionally identical to that four-part ritual structure. The visualization protocols used by top-performing executives, the goal-setting methods taught in exclusive leadership programs, the cognitive reframing techniques of peak performance coaching, they are all modern versions of the same technology. They're just dressed up in scientific terminology and accessible mainly to those who can afford specialized training. And this is where AI gave us an unexpected mirror. An AI system produces reliable, consistent results only when it has clear objectives, precise instructions, and structured feedback loops. Vague input gives you incoherent output. The human mind follows a strikingly similar logic. A vague intention leads to scattered behavior. But a precisely defined, emotionally charged, and consistently reinforced intention starts to reorganize your entire system: how you allocate attention, process information, and choose your actions. The ancient practitioners called this occult knowledge. The modern high-performance industry calls it evidence-based methodology. But the structure underneath both labels has always been exactly the same. If this content is opening something up for you, hit the like button. It helps this channel keep going. Thanks for watching. How the four-part pattern survived every collapse of civilization that tried to erase it. Empires fell, libraries burned, entire languages vanished into archaeological silence. But the four-part structure embedded inside prosperity rituals survived every collapse, because it was never stored primarily in texts. It was stored in practice. In the lived transmission from teacher to student inside traditions that understood that the most dangerous knowledge is the kind that works regardless of whether you believe in the cosmology surrounding it. The grimoires that survived the persecution of magical practitioners in early modern Europe are remarkable documents, not because of their ceremonial complexity, but because of their structural consistency. Beneath the planetary correspondences, the elemental invocations, the elaborate timing systems tied to lunar cycles and astrological configurations, the actual operative instructions follow the same pattern with minimal variation. Define the objective with precision. Construct a symbol that concentrates emotional attention on that objective. Repeat the engagement with that symbol under conditions of heightened internal focus. Take physical action that is coherent with the defined direction. What comes next changes everything. Because when you apply that framework to the documented behavioral patterns of individuals who achieved extraordinary and sustained prosperity across different historical periods, a profile emerges that has nothing to do with luck, inherited advantage, or supernatural favor. What they shared was a quality of intentional consistency that was simply not present in the majority of people around them. They knew specifically what they were building. They returned to that knowledge daily, often through symbolic practice, and their actions were organized around a coherent direction rather than reactive to immediate circumstances. The occult traditions called this alignment. The Hermetic tradition called it the correspondence between inner and outer reality. The Kabbalistic tradition called it the movement from potential to manifestation through focused will. Modern organizational psychology calls it strategic coherence. The names differ. The mechanism is identical, but there's a detail most people miss. The reason this knowledge was encoded in ritual rather than in plain instruction was not arbitrary. Ritual creates the conditions under which the mind actually integrates information at the level where behavioral change occurs. Reading and instruction changes intellectual understanding. Repeating a practice with emotional engagement rewires the operational patterns underneath it. The ceremony was not superstition protecting science. The ceremony was the science. Why what you call ambition might actually be a system running without its core architecture. This is where the investigation arrives at its most uncomfortable point. Not the history, not the cross-cultural convergence of the pattern, not even the deliberate restriction of access to this knowledge across centuries. The most unsettling element is the implication for the present moment. Because if the four-part architecture of prosperity rituals represents a genuine discovery about how human cognitive systems produce consistent outcomes, then the absence of that architecture in a person's daily life is not neutral. It is costly, and it is measurable. Consider what most people actually do when they want to change their financial situation, their career trajectory, their relationships, or their sense of personal power. They think about it frequently. They feel strongly that things should be different. They take action when motivation is high, which means inconsistently, and they wait. They wait for clarity that never arrives. Through waiting, they wait for opportunity that their unfocused attention system cannot reliably recognize, even when it appears directly in front of them. But here's what almost no one notices. This is not a character failure. It is an architectural problem. The cognitive system is operating without the structure that the prosperity rituals were designed to install. Without a precisely defined objective, the brain's predictive machinery has no stable target to orient toward. Without a personal symbol that concentrates emotional attention, the intention disperses across the noise of daily experience. Without structured daily repetition, the neural patterns that would make the objective feel real and actionable never consolidate. And without action aligned with the coherent direction, the cycle produces motion without trajectory. Ancient practitioners of forbidden knowledge understood this with the clarity that most modern self-help culture has systematically diluted. They did not teach desire, they taught structure. They did not promise that wanting something intensely enough would produce it. They transmitted a precise methodology for reorganizing the inner architecture of a human being till the outer results became structurally probable rather than randomly possible. And this opens a door few dare to walk through, because it removes every comfortable explanation for why things have not changed. The ritual was never magic. It was always a mirror, and what it reflected was not what you wanted. It was what you were actually willing to build, with precision, with consistency, and with the kind of daily practice that civilizations never abandoned, because they understood what happened to those who did. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you never miss what comes next. Drop a comment telling us which part of this hit closest to home.